Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Clean Fuels and Hydrogen podcast. My name is Benjamin Greenfield, manager of Clean Fuels and Hydrogen at Pipermatics. We're here with Mary Usovicz. She is the general manager of municipal light and SVP of TRC, SVP of TRC and Repsol. Mary, pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Yes, well, thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. I think it's really interesting. I'm very excited about the future of hydrogen.
Absolutely. I'd love for you to take this opportunity to tell everyone a little bit more about your background and ultimately, how you got into the hydrogen space.
Yeah, so I've progressed in my career the same way the energy industry has progressed. I started off working in the future clean energy fuel, which was going to replace oil and coal, which was natural gas. So I spent a good portion of my career trying to convert oil and gas facilities into coal and oil facilities into natural gas. And then, as we have seen with climate change, natural gas is still emitting a carbon. So the movement was, what's going to be the next fuel? And I started getting into the renewable space and worked with TRC in that area and the power sector, and then UMASS Lowell in business development. And then really took a job here in the municipal world of trying to understand the consumer and how the consumer behaves and their reaction is going to be to renewables. And through the course of it all, what I found is hydrogen is going to have to play a key role, because we need to have something that is going to provide the ability to deal with the intermittent supply issues that come with clean energy, particularly in the renewables, because they rely on Mother Nature. And I hate to say it, Mother Nature is not predictable.
Absolutely, Mary. And I love that you touched upon sort of the consumer's view on all these things, right? Because, we're in the same circles. We know a lot of industry experts, such as ourselves, who talk about all these things. But, less talked about is what your average Jane and John Doe is thinking about hydrogen and how it's going to affect them on a day-to-day basis. In terms of, the clean fuels and hydrogen market, can you give us like a holistic overview of what that looks like in your own words? Like, how would you define clean fuels, including hydrogen?
Well, it's interesting because hydrogen is H2. So if you hear people talk about H2, that's hydrogen. And it's not something that was just discovered yesterday. It's been around forever. The most common way people know about it, and it's terrible, is the Hindenburg. But at that point, there's a whole huge amount of things that have changed in the hydrogen space. So I want people to understand hydrogen is safe. It can become abundant. And the reason it's just stay dormant is not because of safety concerns, it's because of cost. It was just not at a level of efficiency because it takes so much energy to produce hydrogen. And the power that you get from hydrogen is less than what you get from other fossil fuels. So you have to use more hydrogen to get the same amount of what we use in terminology is the horsepower, the energy resource. So as a result, it just was overlooked because the fact is that it had those properties. But with the renewable industry growing so large, and it has a better fit with the needs of hydrogen. And I say that because renewable industry, when it blows the wind, it blows a lot of wind, probably more wind than we can utilize. So instead of curtailing the wind, it would be great if we could use the wind and have another byproduct. And that's the same for the sun. It shines, and sometimes it shines a lot and more than what we need. And it'd be great if we could use it. And then also the nuclear industry is the same thing. They have to run 24/7. So sometimes they too have excess energy. So hydrogen is a great resource because the stumbling block for the use of hydrogen was its energy cost to produce. And if you have all these resources of lower cost energy coming in, then you can create the electrolysis and create hydrogen.
Absolutely. So you touched upon a lot of things there. My main question for you is, why are we having this discussion around hydrogen now? As you said, it's been around for literally ever. Why is it the talk of the town now?
Well, because we want to go to an all-electric system. That's our goal, is to go all-electric. And in order to do so, we need to have some product that's going to help us bridge between the fact that is when the wind dies or the sun doesn't shine, which for solar, it's at nighttime. There is no sun at night. We needed a resource that we could use to basically store the energy and then utilize it and then deploy the energy when we use it. And hydrogen is a great long duration storage tool. It's clean. It has the properties to do long duration storage. And with the cost of those, if we can drive the cost down, which we can with the abundance of all the renewables when it's built, it's a perfect fit.
So Mary, obviously both of us have had a discussion about clean fuels and hydrogen pretty much in depth and why it matters now. On our first episode with our guest, we kind of discussed a little bit more holistic view on the market. And one of the things that came up in that episode that also came up in the conversation just now, and something we've talked about, is cost. And I think that the cost of hydrogen is something that's a major factor, as you said. Based on that, I'm really keen to understand how the cost of hydrogen is going to play a role in the deep decarbonization of the grid in particular. So could you walk me through that a little bit, some of your thoughts?
Sure. So we're moving towards a cleaner energy resource in renewables. And the two largest is going to be the offshore wind, onshore wind, and solar. So that's basically the premise of it. And I really strongly believe there's a division in the industry. I think nuclear also can play a very important role. So all those resources have one characteristic that is constant. They are, for the wind and solar, it's Mother Nature that controls it. With fossil fuel, when we wanted to bring on coal, we wanted to bring on oil, we wanted to bring on gas, we could store it at the point of where we need to do the generation. And when we needed more of that particular resource, we just took it out of the tank and we generated power. We don't have that with the new resources that are coming because Mother Nature is the one creating them. So we can't tell Mother Nature at 2 o'clock we need more wind. So we have to have a storage mechanism that's clean that we can then bring on to take care of these gaps. And that storage, because of its long duration properties, is hydrogen. The only other choice of storage is lithium-ion batteries, and they have a limitation because of their ability to provide that storage. It's limited in hours, whereas hydrogen, as much storage as we build of hydrogen can be the duration, just like if we build a big LNG tank or we had a big coal pile. So that's why hydrogen has such a good fit with the future of the grid, because of power generation. And if we go into fuel cells, we don't even need the power generation component. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But that provides us the ability to have that resource that we need to produce the generation when we need it, for when the grid demands it. Say the grid is we're habitual in terms of we have peaks, but the peaks have been shifting all over. And particularly when the sun, we have what's called the duck curve. So we have weird peaks of when we have all this supply and we don't have the demand, and the load is not there for us to absorb it. So hydrogen is a great balancing in the grid. It provides us the balance and it provides us reliability so that when we come home at night and there is another peak, because everyone comes home, everyone turns on their lights, everyone turns on their television and all their entertainment, their computers and all, then we need to have enough power. And we don't have solar at that point, and we might have a hot night and everyone's got their air conditioning running and we don't have wind. So we need a resource that's going to balance out the grid and be there for reliability.
Absolutely, 100% agree with you there. Now, going back to the consumer side of things, how is the consumer going to realize hydrogen when it becomes integral to our grid system?
Well, because they can just look to California and New England and see what's happening right now. We made a clear signal to the market that we wanted to get off of fossil fuel. The energy market, unlike fashion, the energy market is really a 5-year ahead of a game. Because to build any kind of facility in the energy market, you need a minimum of 5 years. That's if you have to build a pipeline or a power or a windmill or a solar farm. I mean, all these things take time to permit, build, and get online. So when you send out signals to the market, you're sending them out 5 years ahead so the market can react and be ready. So we sent out strong signals that we were getting off of fossil fuel and going to a green. And that is a positive thing. The problem was the wind just didn't get built as fast as we expected. And the solar didn't get built as fast as we expected. So as a result, we have some very, very high energy costs happening in the regions where they really concentrated on getting off those resources. And that's California, the West Coast, and the Northeast. So you can see the difference in the price on energy costs in those two sectors of the country. And the consumer is wondering, they're into rate shock right now,
Yeah.
you know, because they're like, we support clean energy, we support renewables, but we did not know that we were going to see a 60% rate increase like Grid just announced last week in their bills.
Yeah. And so the next question that I have for you on top of that is, how do we bring the cost down? How do we make that happen with hydrogen in particular?
So hydrogen, I know that the community, the environmental community out there would be very upset with me, but hydrogen has rainbows. And I think one of your guests is going to talk about all the different types of hydrogen. But hydrogen is basically can be made from natural gas. You know, it's H2, it's 2 hydrogen. It's used for you extract the hydrogen out of water, but you have to have an energy source to do the electrolysis. And that has to be run by something. It creates an energy resource to run the electrolysis. And so you can use nuclear, you can use natural gas, you can use a whole host of energy resources, hydro, to run the electrolysis. And in the past, those costs were so high that people would say, well, why don't I just burn with natural gas and run the grid? So in the past, when you looked at it, it just seemed silly. Why would I go to another step to create hydrogen when I could just burn the natural gas? So, so unfortunately, we've moved forward on this green energy movement, and we're trying to build out the grid, and we've been closing down power plants and things of that nature. So we need whatever resources we can to fill this gap. And see, hydrogen, I feel, is a very good resource because it has a long duration. It is something that the cost will go down the more we build it out. I always go back to the wind and solar days. You're too young to remember this, but I do, where people were always saying, oh, we can't do wind, we can't do solar, it's just so expensive. But once we made an investment into it and we subsidized it, we actually got to the point where it got to a level where we had so much demand that the cost came down. And I think we could do the same with hydrogen. And the Biden administration has supported that by creating these hydrogen hubs.
So just to confirm, if reading between the lines here,
Sure.
Sounds like you're saying we should just get as much hydrogen out there on the market as we can. And essentially, once we have a ton of it, regardless of what color of hydrogen is, we shouldn't just be, saying green hydrogen or not at all. Get it all out on the market. And then at that point, drive the cost down. And then from there, we can maybe refine everything a little bit further where there's more green hydrogen and less of the other colors of hydrogen, maybe that are a little bit less desirable.
Right, because those other energy resources are going to come online and they'll substitute out the gas, or they'll substitute out any type of other resource that we were using. So mainly gas. So basically, the goal is at one point there was a big discussion, should we just continue using natural gas until all those renewables were built? And people said no, because then we'll never get the renewables built, because people will see the cost of natural gas being cheaper than renewables, and we'll just stay on natural gas forever. So there was a policy conscious decision to say, nope, we're going to eliminate fossil fuel, and we're going to go to an all electric, to go into a cleaner, greener program. So we basically have been building that system for the last 5 years. And so all of our gas now, you just have to follow it. You can see it in the LNG market. It's all being exported over right now to Europe because of what's happening in Ukraine, but there's a lot of exporting of our natural gas. So we need something for the consumer, because that was your question, to make sure that we can keep the prices where people can afford their energy. And hydrogen is a perfect solution, because all we have to do is substitute out the energy resource that comes in to produce electrolysis. And once the wind is up and the solar is up at the level that we have planned for it, we'll just take out the gas.
Absolutely. And, I know that everyone always talks about the energy mix, right? If you were to, had a crystal ball and you were to predict what that energy mix could look like and how hydrogen fits into that, what would you say it is? Would you say we're at 30% hydrogen, 40% hydrogen? How much market share would you say hydrogen's probably going to have once we've kind of reached
Right.
that peak goal of decarbonizing the grid 100%?
Well, it depends on the sectors, because hydrogen also can play a very key role in the aviation sector, in the large vehicle sector, in terms of transportation, in the rail sector. So the properties there are countless. It's not just for, I know you wanted me to focus in on the grid, but there are other people out there that are better suited that can tell you that has a lot of good properties that are necessary for all those. You're never going to get an airplane off the ground using a battery, and everyone knows that. And hydrogen has that ability to get an airplane in the aviation. I don't know how much hydrogen would take, because I'm concentrated on the grid, but it does have those properties. I think for your sake too, because you're out there recruiting this next generation of workers for this new greener, cleaner energy sector, the skill sets that are in the traditional fuels, we call them, in the fossil world, are easily transferred over into the hydrogen. Most likely the way we're going to transport hydrogen is through a pipeline. It's the safest form of transportation. That's why we transported natural gas that way. It has to have compression, so you have to have compression stations. It needs meter stations because you have to get someone to pay for it. So all these jobs along the way with hydrogen are similar to the jobs that are currently there. So the transition of the displaced worker for when that industry dies and we transfer into a cleaner, greener energy, that's the other very positive aspect of hydrogen. So I say it, and I see it that it helps with basically us going all electric. I mean, we are dependent on natural gas. If we could bring hydrogen and use that in our pipelines instead of natural gas, then we could have the ability for the people who are on gas to switch to hydrogen for their heating system instead of having to go all electric.
Absolutely, 100%. And, obviously there are going to be challenges, right, with all of these things. When it comes to, the roadblocks that we're going to face, what would you say, let's say the top 3 major roadblocks are to getting hydrogen into the market and decarbonizing the grid?
Well, the traditional underlying problem of cost.
Yeah. And we keep
That's
coming
the
back
number
to that, right? It's the obvious elephant in the room.
Well, it's the reason we've also been super delayed on solar and wind. It was always discounted. Nobody did solar, nobody did wind, because they kept on saying the cost. And it's unfortunate, because if we had addressed that issue, say 20 or 15 years ago, and said, let us subsidize the renewables instead of an open market, and get it to a level of parity, we wouldn't be at this delayed section now, because we finally said climate change is real, we have to do something about it, and then we started to heavily invest. So we're behind because we didn't take that punch many years ago. So we're trying to do catch up right now. And we're running out of time. I mean, Hurricane Ian is just a perfect example. So I understand the importance of it, and I understand why we need to do it. So we need the federal government to step up and address the cost issue. And they have, with these $8 billion hubs. That is their way of saying, okay, we're going to inject a lot of money into hydrogen. So I think that that's being addressed, because it's always number one on everybody's list. The second is delivery of hydrogen. Okay. You can produce it. It's a very difficult thing to store in its current state. So a lot of people can store it long duration as an ammonia. It stays stable, doesn't lose any of its properties or anything of that nature. Problem is the conversion of ammonia. Those are mostly in the Midwest and the South, and we have one, I think, in all of the Northeast, and that's in New York. So we have to think about how to basically develop the storage. The best thing we could do is put it right into fuel cells, but the technology of fuel cells is still years away. We could put it in pipelines and transport it all around. But the problem is it doesn't do well in cast iron pipes and steel. So we haven't gotten to the PVC pipes that we need to transport it. So those are it's not going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah.
But we said the same thing in the wind and solar, and now we're trying to do catch up. So if we bring on as much wind and solar as we're expecting, there is nothing but hydrogen that we that can provide the storage. So it's almost like a marriage. If you're bringing wind and solar to the levels you want to, you have to have hydrogen. It's an arranged marriage, and it has to happen.
I love the way you put that. You talked about the hydrogen hubs, and I just want to touch upon that for a little bit, just for our listeners who may not kind of maybe can't fully conceptualize in their head what these hydrogen hubs are, because it's something that's talked about a lot, but kind of hard to conceptualize if you're maybe not in industry. So can you just talk about a little bit, like, what is a hydrogen hub, what it looks like, and why it's important?
Well, if I knew exactly what DOER was going to do, I'd probably be hired tomorrow. Basically, in the infrastructure bill, the Biden administration put $8 billion to create these hydrogen hubs. Originally, it was like 4. Now I think it's 6. We don't know the exact number that's going to be. It's they want a regional way of solving the solution on how do we interject hydrogen into the region. They haven't picked which regions it is. Everyone's guessing. People are saying one's going to be in California, one's going to be in the Northeast, one's going to be down in Louisiana, one might be in the Pennsylvania coal country, the Adirondacks, to pick up the whole Ohio Valley. It's really going to be DOER's call. They're going to be announced very shortly. I think they're already announced the New Orleans one, so the rest are going to be announced shortly. And it's basically the hydrogen hub is supposed to deal with all these things we're talking about today: the workforce, the end users, the rate, the cost, the development of the electrolysis, the distribution, the storage. You're supposed to come in with a proposal that addressed all those aspects of hydrogen, and the group that does the best will be awarded, $2 billion to make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a perfect way to put it, right? It's almost like, I would say, a one-stop shop. You make it, you ship it, you produce it, and sort of covers the entire region.
And users, right? Everything. Yeah. Like soup to nuts, from the minute you show up, what you're going to serve the person, from soup all the way to the dessert. They want it all in one package. And here is a lot of money to make it happen and identify commitments from the people who are going to build the facilities, engineer the facilities, come up with innovative ways to address any of the roadblocks. And it takes out of the equation the word cost, because 2 billion is a tremendous amount of money.
Absolutely. And so we obviously have these hydrogen hubs, right? That's, a major component. What role do you say, let's say, small to medium sized developers are going to, like, what hand are they going to play in this process? Is it really just up to the government or the DOE to fund these projects? Or do you think there's going to be influence from, private entities that are going to be developing these hydrogen projects and facilities across the country?
Well, the hubs are made up of all the private sector, first of all. So it's a public-private partnership from what I've seen most of the hubs. Second of all, it just reminds me of, basically the wind industry and the solar industry. There was a subsidies by the government, but now all of the offshore wind that's been cited in the RFPs along the Atlantic coastline is all private investment. So I think is that the government is smart. They're starting the spark to drive up the demand, which then the market will take over. And that's the goal.
Absolutely, 100%. In terms of you, I want to talk about for you a little bit. Obviously, you have your own podcast, right? And if you're open to it, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about your own passion projects, more about the podcast. What kind of motivates you to continue your journey into the hydrogen space, and maybe some things that our listeners would be interested in hearing about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I belong to a group called New England Women in Energy and Environment. It's NEWE, and we have this thing called Ask Me Anything, and I have guests on. And our purposes of what we have our shows on are twofold. One is, believe it or not, this industry, the energy sector, both environmental and energy, but more so in the energy, we just don't attract women. And we started our group about 14 years ago to figure out why. And it's a very heavily dominated male industry. We're trying to change that. And I encourage women to get into it, because people say, why are you so passionate about energy? And I say to people, think of a day, any day that you have no power. What kind of a day is it? I don't have to give you the word to answer that. And I'm sure the people in Florida are experiencing that right now. We are so dependent on energy now, more so than at any point. I mean, if we didn't have energy during COVID to do the internet, between the internet and having the power to then have your computer do it like we're doing right now, we would not, the whole market, the whole economy would have crashed. I mean, so it's a really critical piece to our everyday life is energy. And I'm fascinated on the journey that we've taken to try to understand that energy is not only a major polluter, but it could be a major way of us reducing our pollutants, but also going greener, but also finding ways to do it more efficiently. So I think it's got so many facets to it. It's so interesting. So my goal and through what I do is to really promote getting more women interested in this space, particularly transitioning into green energy, and seeing that if you're in the traditional fuels like I was, you can make that journey into the clean, greener energy sector. And it's one that I think more and more companies are seeing how we have to go to that direction. There's less resistance than there used to be in the past.
Absolutely, 100%, Mary. Just to reiterate for everyone, in moving forward, what we're going to be covering in the initial 4-part series is other topics such as manufacturing, heavy industry, as well as transportation. So keep an eye out for those discussions. We have a really great lineup of guests. Mary, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
And it's great. I think Pipermatics is a great company in terms of, I'll just do a little pitch because I think it's really, and I've taken our young professionals, have referred them to Pipermatics. I think it's wonderful that you guys have specialized in this space, because I think it really helps people understand the transition. there's a lot of people who are in energy and they feel lost on how to get transitioning into this new growth that's happening. And I can't thank Pipermatics enough for being the company to help them on this journey as we go into a clean energy, so that they don't abandon working in the energy sector. We've worked too hard to get women in this energy sector. So I'm thrilled that you're available. You've had great staff. I've had them on my podcast. I've had them come to our events. So I just wanted to do a shout out to thank you for being there to help, particularly the sector that I'm very interested in, women in that sector transition to this new era in energy.
Absolutely, Mary. I appreciate the kind words, and we appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time so much. Thank you.
Take care. Look forward to hearing the rest of the shows. All right.